Hi, and welcome to week 6 of the course. We're looking at political economy of communication. So we're a little bit more than halfway through the quarter, and the first half of the quarter, we really looked at, every week we're looking at a lot of different theories. And this week we're going to focus on one theory and how political economy, which can be used to study a lot of different areas of research, how it applies specifically to communication. So it's pretty broad, and there are a lot of aspects we can look at. And I'm going to be bringing in examples that aren't necessarily in the text, but try to really bring real life examples and considerations about how political economy of communication, how it plays out, how it exists in the world. So let's get started. First, a definition. Political economy is the study of the social power relations, particularly power relations that mutually constitute production, distribution, and consumption of resources, including communication resources. So this is what we're talking about, sort of the intersection of power, finances, resources, and then the creation of actual content that's consumed. So some key ideas from Baran and Davis. These are from last week's reading, but there was a section on political economy, so let's look at a few of those here. There's a focus on how content production and distribution are constrained. So it's not just that the systems allow for distribution, but it really critically looks at how politics and economics influence what is produced and how that may be constraining other voices. Another statement was how the superstructure, in general, this is the topic they talk about, is how the superstructure, which is culture, the message, the meaning, kind of everything outside of the means of production and the base, which are the media systems, can influence each other. So this is Baran and Davis relating political economy to Marxist theory. So here's a little Venn diagram. I've seen others that don't include consumers. So you can think about, yes, politics and economics and how those intersect to influence and create media systems. But I think it's equally as important to consider consumers, especially in an era where there's so much consumer-created content or user-generated content. So I think it's important to think about how they are consumers, both by demand and by content generation, are also impacting these systems. So we're also going to look at micro versus macro experiences. So cultural theory looks a lot at what is the individual experience and how is that culturally relevant, how is that situated within a specific cultural context. So how is a text interpreted within a cultural context? Political economy really looks at the macro experience of how content flows and how it's shared and how it's created. So in terms of consuming media, here are a few images. We've got the person sitting at home watching TV with two screens, the TV screen and a phone screen. We've got a community. This happens to be a picture from India, and it's a community watching a Bollywood film. And then you have the young child who sits solo and uses their tablet to consume YouTube and videos and play video games at their own leisure. So on the other end of that spectrum, outside of consumership, we have to look at systems of ownership. So there are a couple aspects to the systems of ownership, and those include the physical structures and infrastructure. So cables, bandwidth, servers, like who owns hardware to transport content. Content ownership, so who owns the rights to shows, who has the ability to pay and hire creatives and producers. Distribution rights and companies are another player. So Netflix has distribution rights for a lot of different content that they don't own, but they own the right to distribute it. Content creation, so this is another aspect of ownership. So who's creating content at what level? So we have traditional content generation, and now we have user-generated content. So anyone with a phone with a camera is able to create content. And then media conglomerates that can concentrate power are another aspect of ownership. So owning multiple agencies, being able to compete or not compete, or by two companies so that they don't compete against each other in the same way are all parts of the systems of ownership within a political economy framework. I want to look at international structures because there are a lot of structures outside of our US context that are impacting our experience and ways in which we impact the experience of others, or how international systems influence just how media and how data move. So this picture is showing the underwater, under the ocean submarine cables that actually transport. Originally, they were laid to transport telegraphs. And today we have underground cables that transport broadband. We do have Wi-Fi, but for some of these longer connections, we actually have to have underground cable. And it's important to know who owns those. Some national structures are, how is broadband laid out across the country? So I used to work at an agency, and we did some work with expansion of the Front Range Gigapop, which you'll see runs right through Denver. And if you are closer to these yellow lines, you're much closer to these massive pipes that have tons and tons and tons of capacity to transport data at high speeds. Now, the farther away you are from those lines, the more difficult it is to have broadband internet, or to have a landline, or even Wi-Fi, because you can at least use landlines to get signal closer to rural areas. But basically, rural communities have a harder time accessing high-speed internet. And with that, a harder time participating in the media landscape as we know it. I've got two slides of media ownership looking at 2016. They're different. So this one is from the Wall Street Journal, and this is 3 years old, just looking at the size of companies and how much they're worth. And then in 2019, a slightly different look at it from the website Recode. But you can see that there are more bubbles that are closer in size on this image than on the previous image. So here you really have a couple large ones, and they get smaller quite quickly. And on this slide, we've got about 5 that are kind of similar in size. So I want to jump to content production. In terms of scheduling, airtime, and ratings, Baran and Davis ask, why do some forms of culture dominate primetime television schedules, whereas other forms are absent? Does audience taste alone explain those differences, or can other, less obvious reasons be linked to the interest of economic institutions? I mean, we know that ratings influence how long a show lasts on the air. So if it's not economically feasible, if it's not bringing in advertiser dollars, then the shows can really quickly be canceled, even mid-season. I did link to a video for readings this week, and it's called Opening Access, and it really looks at the business model of TV. It was produced by the nonprofit that I worked at in Denver for a number of years. So hopefully you'll take a look at that, and it'll give you some interesting insight on how television works, the relationship to public access television and cable companies. If you've ever wondered why you have government fees on your cable bill, if you still have a cable bill, but when you did, and if you had those fees actually fund public access television so that community members can produce their own content, and they have direct access to airing it on a television station in their city or region. So Opening Access, the link is in the week 6 module. So producers, who are our producers? Sometimes producers look like this. This is a set with a green screen, a lot of different cameras, lighting kits, so a much higher tech type of production. You've got famous people, Clint Eastwood. The types of movies he can fund and produce are a completely different scale than the public access television producer, who has, probably a much more basic camera, limited resources. They're working with volunteers, and they're not getting paid. There's no profit in that production. Versus a YouTuber of today who can sit at home with a laptop or a camera and create a video and then upload it to YouTube. going to now jump to hardware, software, and media regions. So beyond production and who owns content, there are also aspects of hardware and software that impact how content can move. So many of us are probably streaming a lot of our content, but DVDs and DVD players still exist, and there are probably other parts of the world where they're still used more commonly. And if you've traveled in the last 5 to 20 years, you may have experienced what we're going to look at. I'm going to jump actually to the media regions right after I explain a little bit about the center and periphery. So the center and periphery are it's a really important related concept within international affairs. And the center generally refers to those countries of the Western world, which is North America and Western Europe. So if you look carefully at Europe, sort of Southeastern Europe, Eastern Europe have become the periphery. They're not the center. And the center refers to this idea that from the center, there is power, there's money, there's control over politics. This plays out with media. The strength of the English language is something that moves from the center out toward the periphery. So content is produced at higher rates in the center and pushed out toward periphery countries. And there are all sorts of economic models and the ability to buy out or pay for distribution in other countries that can actually inhibit local production and inhibit a thriving local production like film industry. And we have countries that are in the middle. So in this image, they're called the semi-periphery. So these are countries that have an economic power that's somewhere in the middle. So looking at India, China, sometimes Russia's included in that. It's not here. Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. I lost the transition. Okay, so we're going to think about what does it mean to watch a movie in two different places in the world. So if I want to watch Aladdin in the US, I buy Aladdin, or I own it from childhood, and I pop it in my DVD player. So maybe I'm going to go on a vacation and stay at an Airbnb, and my Airbnb has a DVD player. So I think I'll bring a couple movies with me, and I might want to watch those while I'm there. Bear with me. I know I'd be streaming off of a Roku too, but just to make a point, we're going to pretend that we're taking our DVDs with us. So if I want to watch the same DVD in Greece, if I try to take that DVD to Greece and play it on a Greek DVD player, it's not going to work. So as you can see here, this is an image of Aladdin. This is a 3 set of 3 of the Aladdin movies. But you notice that it says that this is the English Greek region 2. And that's because there are actually 8 media regions across the world, and DVDs and DVD players are coded so that discs only play on certain machines. And here is an image of not a region 2 DVD player, but a region free DVD player. So this special DVD player can play any DVD that's produced anywhere in the world. But the Aladdin region 2 DVD player, or region 2 DVD, would not play on a US DVD player. You'd have to have either a region free or a Greek one. So I'm going to jump ahead to Moscow's take on the political economy of communication. And he says, in the narrowest use of the term, it describes the simple acknowledgement that the production, distribution, and exchange of information and communication has come to occupy relatively more economic activity than either agriculture or manufacturing, which dominated production for most of human history. So Moscow is making a point about how the massive place in the world that communication and media now occupy. It's a really dominant industry that affects so many aspects of our lives. And he also said that communication and information technology contribute to capitalism by expanding the size of the market for products and labor, but do not call into question the fundamental nature of capitalism. So capitalism requires purchasing and expansion of markets so that goods can move across from sellers to consumers. So it's not really looking at whether or not capitalism is good or bad, but just that the nature of capitalism is such that there's this expansion of product and distribution. I want to lean a little bit into now Marxism and how Marxism relates to political economy. So Moscow also said that, moreover, political economy aimed to situate theory about mass mediated activity within the wider framework of political economic, particularly Marxian theory. Political economy also argued for a critical approach that examines empirical findings in the light of a critical purpose, such as the need to advance democratic communication by building public systems of communication. So political economy is using this lens, using theories of political economy to look at systems, we can critique whether or not, free flow of information actually exists. And I think the conclusion that political economists come to is that the systems and the power and the economic control hinder a truly democratic communication system. So I drew this chart just to take the base superstructure diagram that helps explain Marxism and make it specifically relevant to communication. So at the base, we have everything related to production. So we have infrastructure, ownership, production, production houses, media companies, movie houses, distribution, software, hardware, and money. And in the superstructure, we have meaning making, discourse, demand, ratings, individual experience, media law, politics, education, and many other things that I'm categorizing as experience. Other charts will say it's kind of everything outside of production, but the experience of communication and media. So if we look at this, we see that the base is influencing content, meaning making, demand, but that then demand is also influencing what is produced by media owners. So a few reflections. How do power and wealth influence media systems and content selection and distribution? How do news and entertainment, because they both inform us about our world, but what is produced and how are they impacted by the political economy of communication? So we've got two different, just to consider as you're thinking through this, we've news and entertainment, they're very different formats. We learn about our world through both types, but when we look at power and economic impact, or that relationship of who's in power and who has the money, how does that impact what is produced through the news and entertainment? And then finally, to be reflecting this week on media ownership and what are the limits to what we can access. Reflect on how media ownership limits what we can access, which limits knowledge, what is outside of our control and what is within our control. So we can only see and view and experience and consume what we can access. And so how much control do we actually have over our experience when we have limited means to control production? So those are a few questions and things to be thinking about this week. And hopefully this gives you some aspects to consider about political economy of communication that might not be present in the readings.